In September 2019, police arrived at a seemingly ordinary home in Pennsylvania to conduct a welfare check on a resident who had been unresponsive to calls. From the outside, everything appeared normal, windows closed, curtains drawn, but no one answered the door. Concerned for the individual's well-being, officers forced entry into the home, only to be met with a chilling scene that would haunt them for years to come. Blood stained the floors, towels were soaked with evidence of violence, and signs of a struggle were evident throughout the house. As they ascended the stairs, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight that left them shaken and filled with questions. This was no random act of violence. It bore the marks of something meticulously planned and deeply personal. Margaret was born on June 28, 1958 in Pennsylvania, where her childhood revolved around her family's dance studio, a vibrant hub of creativity that was cherished by the local community. The studio was more than just a workplace. It was her second home, a place where she learned the values of discipline, artistry, and community. As she grew older, Margaret became a ballet instructor, helping to run the studio and organizing cherished Christmas performances that became beloved local traditions. Her warmth and energy left a lasting impression on everyone she encountered, and she was known for her magnetic personality, always poised, always well put together. Despite the hardships life threw her way, Margaret carried herself with grace, resilience, and a sense of purpose. In her early adulthood, Margaret married John Joseph Terry, but the relationship quickly unraveled due to his emotional absence and irresponsibility. After their divorce, Margaret found herself a single mother to two daughters, Helen and Peg. With no support from their father, she shouldered the full burden of parenting while continuing her work at the studio. Despite the challenges, she created a loving and structured environment for her daughters, instilling in them the values she held dear. Years later, Margaret met David Lee Sumney, a charismatic dentist and Harvard graduate. His charm and apparent devotion provided the stability she had longed for, and they married in 1986, building a life of financial security in a well-appointed Pennsylvania home. In 1989, they welcomed a son, David Lee Sumney Jr. David Sr. was actively involved in raising Jr., and his bond with Helen and Peg grew strong. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family, a different story was unfolding. David Jr. grew up without limits, with his every desire fulfilled instantly. From an early age, he learned that he could manipulate those around him to get what he wanted. Toys, vacations, and indulgences were granted without question, and over time he shifted from asking to demanding. Even routine tasks became negotiable, and he refused to comply without some form of reward. Gratitude and responsibility held no value for him, only personal gain. One deeply troubling incident involved a bird he found in the backyard, which he squeezed to death. Margaret, horrified by his lack of remorse, nervously joked to relatives that he acted like a future criminal, but beneath the humor lay genuine alarm. By 2001, Margaret and David Sr.'s marriage had quietly collapsed. Their divorce, though amicable, marked the end of the stability Margaret had worked so hard to build. The family's financial structure crumbled, and the dance studio, once their cornerstone, was forced to close. With limited resources, Margaret took a job at a clothing store to cover basic expenses, while David Jr.'s sense of entitlement only grew stronger. Despite their financial struggles, David Sr. continued to support Jr. at great personal cost, rationalizing it as a way to preserve their fragile relationship. The couple no longer shared a home, but emotionally they remained tethered, caught in a pattern of submission dictated by Jr.'s unpredictable moods. As the years passed, Jr.'s power over his parents intensified. Even as their lives became more unstable, neither parent changed course. The household dynamic had fully shifted. Their world now revolved around managing their son's emotions and minimizing his outbursts. In 2008, at the age of 19, David Jr. enrolled at George Washington University to study mathematics. His parents, despite years of hardship, saw a glimmer of hope believing that higher education and a structured environment might finally redirect his behavior. However, in 2010, Margaret called her daughter Helen from a hospital, claiming Junior had tried to harm himself with a knife and she had fallen during the ordeal, injuring her head. But Margaret's story was vague and defensive, raising suspicions about the true nature of the incident. No investigation was opened, and the matter was officially dropped. Shortly after this disturbing event, David Jr. was expelled from the university for chronic absenteeism, aggressive altercations, and repeated violations of campus rules. The incident devastated his parents. All their efforts, emotional, financial, and psychological, had resulted in yet another failure. Once again, Junior returned home to Pennsylvania, alternating between both parents' homes, showing no signs of reform. By July 2015, Junior, now 26, reached a new low. He was unemployed, unmotivated, and still entirely reliant on his parents. When he asked David Sr. for a large sum of money to fund a vacation and was refused, the situation escalated into violence. Junior physically attacked his father, brutally beating him in their home. Neighbors, alarmed by the chaos, called for help. When police arrived, they found Junior still on top of his father, delivering blows. David Sr.'s injuries were catastrophic. Doctors diagnosed him with brain hemorrhaging, spinal trauma, and severe internal damage. He was left unable to walk or care for himself and had to be moved to a long-term nursing facility. Junior was arrested at the scene and charged with aggravated assault, not attempted murder, as many in the family believed he should have been. He was released shortly after posting bond. The man he had nearly killed could no longer speak for himself. Despite the brutal attack, Junior faced few consequences. With little legal resistance and a family too broken to fight back, he walked free, unchanged, unrepentant, and more emboldened than ever. In the aftermath, he began telling those around him that he had joined the U.S. Navy. This story seemed like a strange twist, but Margaret clung to it as military service offered the illusion of hope, a structured, disciplined path that might rescue her son from his own darkness. However, there was no record of any enlistment. He presented no documents, wore no uniform, and dodged questions about his supposed service. Every inquiry led to vague, unverifiable answers. Meanwhile, Junior began transforming himself physically. He took up strength training with obsessive focus, gaining significant muscle mass in a short span of time. Now standing close to 6.5 feet tall and heavily built, his appearance became as threatening as his behavior. As his physical power grew, so did his aggression. Junior became more volatile and unpredictable. Conversations with him were laced with hostility, veiled threats, and blatant attempts to dominate those around him. He made it clear, subtly or directly, that resistance would be met with force. Margaret, worn down by years of fear, confusion, and love, remained at his side, still hoping the son she had raised might someday return to the boy she thought she knew. But by then, control was no longer something Margaret or anyone in the family had. Junior was no longer just difficult or entitled. He had become dangerous, and no one seemed able or willing to stop him. Then, in November 2016, Margaret's home became the scene of another horrifying episode. Late at night, Junior, heavily intoxicated, crept into her bedroom and began to strangle her in her sleep. The attack was silent and brutal. Given his sheer size and strength, Margaret had little chance to resist. Gasping for air, she managed to break free and scream. Junior withdrew without explanation and went back to his room. Margaret called the police. When officers arrived, they found Junior asleep and reeking of alcohol, while Margaret had bruises and finger marks on her neck and ribs. She told the officers what had happened, adding that Junior mentioned using a Marine Corps technique, a chilling claim that reignited skepticism about his military story. Once again, Margaret intervened. Fearing that a felony charge would ruin her son's future, she urged prosecutors to reduce the severity of the charges. She claimed he had acted under the influence and needed help, not prison time. She leaned on the idea, still unproven, that Junior had served in the U.S. Navy, presenting it as evidence of his potential. Her plea persuaded the court. The felony was reduced to a lesser administrative charge, and Junior avoided serious punishment. During court proceedings, an official background check exposed the truth. David Jr. had never served in any branch of the military. The story he had told for years was a complete fabrication. There was no record of recruitment, enlistment, or training. His military persona had been a calculated lie to mask his failures and violent tendencies. Still, Margaret clung to the belief that her son could change. Junior was sentenced to 16 months, his first real consequence. While incarcerated, he presented himself as a man battling addiction rather than aggression. He claimed alcohol was the root of his problems, not a lack of empathy or violent impulse. The strategy worked. One social worker advocated for his transfer to a rehabilitation facility instead of prison, and the court approved it. At the Pennsylvania Recovery Center, Junior was placed under structured supervision. He joined therapy sessions and group activities. Margaret visited often, bringing supplies and continuing to defend her son. For her, the rehabilitation signaled a possible turning point. If he could complete the program, maybe the worst was over. Upon finishing treatment, Junior entered transitional housing and quickly found work. According to progress reports, he followed the rules and showed signs of adjustment. To outsiders and a hopeful family, he seemed reformed. However, this appearance was merely superficial. Deep beneath the good behavior lay the same manipulative core. Junior never took true responsibility for his past, never expressed real remorse, and never acknowledged the pain he had caused. By 2018, the carefully constructed mask David Lee Sumney Jr. wore was beginning to crack, but not fast enough for the system to respond. That August, his father, David Lee Sumney Sr., passed away at the age of 74 in a Pennsylvania nursing home. Officially, no cause of death was listed beyond age-related complications. However, to those who knew the family's history, the true catalyst had been clear for years. The brutal 2015 beating David Sr. had suffered at the hands of his own son. That violent attack left him with brain damage, spinal trauma, and permanent physical disabilities. He lost his independence, his ability to work, and his dignity. The decline was steady and irreversible. Though no one in the family spoke openly about it, there was a shared understanding that Junior's assault had destroyed the man David Sr. once was. And yet, Junior remained free, untouched by further charges and unburdened by guilt. At the funeral, Margaret stood composed, never speaking a word against her son. Her silence deepened rifts within the family. They struggled to understand how she could continue to shield the person responsible for such devastation. For them, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic failure. Law enforcement had acted too late, the courts had been too lenient, and Margaret's protective instincts had, in their view, allowed a dangerous man to keep harming others. In 2019, Junior entered a new relationship through a dating app. The woman, who later chose to remain anonymous for her safety, moved in with him soon after they met. Initially, Junior seemed transformed, charming, respectful, and attentive. But the illusion didn't last long. He soon became controlling and aggressive, monitoring her movements and enforcing rigid rules inside the home. The woman noticed something unsettling. Junior was using checks written in Margaret's name. He claimed his mother suffered from mental health issues and that he was managing her bills, forging her signature when needed. However, there was no legal documentation, no power of attorney, and no court order supporting this claim. When his partner raised concerns, he deflected with excuses about paperwork delays. Though she suspected fraud, she lacked the proof to involve authorities. As their relationship deteriorated and she prepared to leave, Junior reacted with fury. Determined not to be rejected, he coerced her into meeting him at a hotel in Atlantic City. Once there, he turned violent. Over the course of several days, she was beaten, strangled into unconsciousness multiple times, and held captive without access to help. At one point, Junior believed he had killed her and fled the room. She remained motionless and injured until a concerned hotel housekeeper, alarmed by the prolonged "Do Not Disturb" sign, entered the room. The woman was found alive, but barely so. She was rushed to the hospital, and police launched an investigation. An arrest warrant for Junior was issued on July 16, 2019. However, due to a critical error, the warrant was never uploaded to the federal database. This administrative failure allowed Junior to return to Pennsylvania without being flagged as a fugitive. Days later, he was picked up on unrelated charges, but because his warrant hadn't been entered into the system, he was released without consequence. The woman's assault had slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect her. This failure of communication between agencies would have devastating consequences. Only weeks later, on September 1, 2019, Margaret's family would suffer yet another, even more horrific loss. And this time, there would be no more warnings left to ignore. That day, John, Margaret's brother, passed away. As the news spread among relatives, efforts were made to coordinate the funeral. One of John's sisters attempted to contact Margaret several times, but her calls went unanswered. Concerned, she reached out to Margaret's eldest daughter, Helen, who also tried to get in touch with no success. By the morning of September 2nd, growing anxious, Helen persisted. Eventually, her brother answered the phone. He claimed Margaret was asleep and refused to put her on the line. His voice was flat, evasive, and dismissive. Sensing something was deeply wrong, the family contacted local authorities and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at Margaret's home, everything seemed still. The windows were shut, and no one responded. After a few minutes of silence, police forced entry and immediately sensed that something terrible had taken place. A foul odor filled the air. Bloodstains trailed across multiple rooms. Drag marks and stained towels revealed efforts to clean up or conceal the scene. Upstairs, they found Margaret in the bathtub. She had been dead for over 24 hours, her body showing multiple blunt force injuries, particularly around the head and neck. Blood covered the walls and floors, and in the hallway, investigators discovered a sickle stained with what appeared to be blood. A revolver registered to Margaret was missing, leaving only its empty ammunition box behind. Forensic experts meticulously combed through the scene. The amount of blood, the cleanup attempts, and the strategic positioning of items throughout the house suggested not only brutality, but calculation. This was not a frenzied or impulsive killing, it was prolonged and deliberate. The most chilling evidence came from a digital device. Among Junior's belongings was a laptop and an external hard drive. On it, police discovered 277 photos taken in the aftermath of the killing. Some showed Margaret's body staged in various positions, while others were selfies of Junior posing with his mother's lifeless body, expressionless or even smug. The lighting had been adjusted and angles arranged. The timestamps revealed that the process had unfolded over hours. Alongside the photos, his browsing history offered damning insight. He had searched for how to clean blood from surfaces, how human bodies decompose, and methods to avoid detection in residential settings. He had looked up chemical odor neutralizers and even the science behind mummification. Junior had not panicked, he had prepared. The brutality of the crime and the calculated nature of the aftermath formed a psychological portrait of someone devoid of conscience, remorse, or restraint. Investigators had no doubt who was responsible, but the challenge was capturing him. Police turned to the one person still in occasional contact with Junior, Helen. They asked her to help set a trap, and she agreed, inviting Junior to attend their Uncle John's funeral, knowing he might show up. When he did, officers were waiting. He was arrested on the spot. Among his possessions were Margaret's checks and pieces of her jewelry. He was formally charged with third-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, theft, and related crimes. A psychiatric evaluation declared him competent to stand trial. In August 2022, Junior took a plea deal. He admitted guilt and was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. With time served, he would be eligible for parole in 2039, around his 50th birthday. To Margaret's surviving relatives, the outcome felt like a betrayal. The horror of the crime, the photographic documentation, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail should have warranted a harsher charge. Her daughters and sisters spoke publicly, condemning the deal and calling the sentence inadequate. In court, Junior gave a brief statement. He apologized and claimed he didn't understand how he could have done what he did. His words rang hollow. For the family, this wasn't an act of madness. It was the final result of a lifetime without limits, one marked by manipulation, abuse, and warning signs ignored or dismissed. Margaret Sumney's story ended not with a sudden tragedy, but with a long, preventable descent into horror. She was killed not by a stranger, but by the child she had always defended. In just 2 days, the family lost both John and Margaret, but in truth, they had lost Junior years before. Helen severed all ties with her brother, the man she once called family, now living as a convicted murderer. What remained was not just grief, but the heavy weight of what could have been prevented. The systemic failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold left a lasting impact on the family, a reminder of the dangers of ignoring warning signs and the complexities of familial loyalty. Thanks for tuning in to Hidden Motive. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.